All right. I kind of said hello to everyone. Hopefully they could hear me. They couldn't have seen me, it looks like, but welcome.
Yeah, welcome everyone. Thank you for being here with us. We're actually waiting for Erik. So hopefully we were all together on Zoom and trying to all hop on here. So I could just begin because we have some people jumping in here. Thank you so much, Ben, for taking this time. I'm Chloe. I'm representing Synergetic Press, which is an independent book press. We focus in ecological and consciousness and psychedelic topics mainly. And yeah, we recently published The Regenerative Landscaper with Erik Ohlsen, and it's been yay, thank you. You have the book. Amazing. And
Here
we
we
asked Ben
are.
to endorse the book, and here he is endorsing the book live for us.
What's up, everyone? What's up, Ben, Chloe?
Hey, you made it. Great.
I'm
Yeah.
glad you were able to join. So I was buying us some time by introducing a little bit of who we are. Yeah, and so let's jump right in. We scheduled about 1 hour here, and I'm going to just say Erik Ohlsen is from Permaculture Artisans. That's one of his businesses. His other one is the Permaculture Skills Center. They're both based out of Occidental, California. Really beautiful places. I definitely recommend visiting if you're around. And Ben Falk of Whole Systems Design. He's hosting this, so I'm assuming a lot of people know who you are, Ben. So thank you so much again for hosting this space with us. And I'd like for you both to share a little bit about who you are before I start facilitating the questions. Ben, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Who am I? I am a homesteader and have two books out, The Resilient Farm and Homestead. We teach permaculture courses, and I'm a landscape architect, and we have a design business called Whole Systems Design where we do site planning for people.
Great. Thank you. And Erik?
Yeah. Yeah, I have been doing permaculture for about 25 years and run a design contracting company, Permaculture Artisans. And as you saw, I just came out with my new book, The Regenerative Landscaper.
Well,
500-page comprehensive manual. And I also have a small homestead, not like Ben's totally epic, large killer homestead. Mine's a little smaller, small scale, but it's doable. Got 1 acre, got about 150 fruit trees, water harvesting systems, swimming ponds, and all that kind of stuff. So, living, and growing as much of our own food and our own medicine as possible. And Ben, you've always been a huge inspiration with all you share around that too. So super fun to be here with you.
You too. Thanks. Yeah, I get a lot of books sent to me, and I would say 2/3 of them I don't want to do a blurb for. They're just like not. I don't feel like they're adding a lot of value. And when I got your book, immediately I wanted to read it, and I did. And I think I gave you a blurb. They sent me a free book, and it's phenomenal. It's really adding so much value to the field. It's super thorough. It's a great reference book too.
I would definitely second that, but it's amazing to hear that from you, Ben. Thank you. And I'm excited about this, not only because you're both esteemed permaculturalists and regenerative landscapers, but because you're coming from two extremely different climates. So I'm excited to dig both of your brains a little bit and have the audience here. So I'm just going to briefly go over the questions that we'll be talking about in this hour. We're going to be talking about 3 tips for beginner regenerative designers, biggest challenges to implement a regenerative design, and then what is your ideal future for regenerative landscaping will be the last question there. So yeah, some juicy topics. Let's start with the 3 tips for beginner regenerative designers. Who wants to jump in?
I'll throw one in. to start us off. And tip number one is stop trying to be a designer and be an ecosystem observer, first and foremost. First and foremost, stop trying to change things. Go out into nature, go out into your backyard, you go into yourself, your nature, you're as much nature as the forest around you, and just go out and just take time to be in wonder and just total curious childlike wonder of the snow, wonder of a bug, wonder of a mushroom. Ask questions. I think that core practice and that core connection, I think that's what really separates like great regenerative designers from just sort of like practitioner folks who are just sort of getting stuff done, is can you listen to your ecosystem and find that story? So that would be one tip.
I that's phenomenal, and I couldn't agree more. I think that is what's separating permaculture design, right, from conventional. Like, why is this any different? Why is this more of an alignment with the living world process? And if we can't start from a basis of listening, we can't align ourselves very well and work with nature as opposed to against nature. I would add that so I got ended up on land when I was 25, which I had a lot of permaculture information in my head at that point, but I had not much experience. And I observed a lot early on, but I had this amazing experience of the first planting season. I immediately learned in the first 3 days of digging holes so much more about the soils and how they vary across the site than I'd learned in 3/4 of a year of just watching. So that's why that was the observe and interact
Yes.
principle. The interaction point also like played in big then. I was like, okay, so it's like we got to do also, but we got to be careful in our doing. Don't do it with the excavator at the beginning, but maybe do with the spade, or the seed, things like that.
Man, I'm so with you on that, because there is that whole analysis paralysis that shows up for folks. You're like, oh, just observe. They tell me go observe and listen. I mean, it's like, but you got to do shit. You got to scratch around like a mammal,
Sure.
and like a bird, and like build little piles and be a do some disturbance, like with your
Yeah.
hands, and just see what happens. Harvest some things and do different things with your harvests.
Mhm.
Make a medicine. Try to carve a piece of wood. What's the difference between trying to carve a piece of redwood versus black walnut? That's going to tell you a lot about the tree, just to do a little art project.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I would say for a second tip, for folks starting out, beginners starting out, is we spoke. There's a lot of time that is in my book and in Ben's book, and but both Ben and I have firms that do a lot of design, and we do a lot of mapping. So Ben, it's kind of a question for you, and I'm going to throw a little tip in there. Is like the balance between so much time spent on mapping a design versus, I think it was like more valuable for people who are in the beginning, which is to map things out like in the land. Like you draw your concept, that's cool, but don't expect your concept to necessarily be, at least at the beginning while you're still learning your skills, to necessarily be, the best it can be, until you actually get out and stake things and say, oh, look at the slope is a little different than I thought it was. Oh, the spacing here and there. And I think that's something that I notice a lot of folks put so much in the map. And then when you go to the build, you miss all these site features and, things inevitably change.
Another one, I couldn't emphasize that enough. I mean, we say in our permaculture course, the map is not the territory. We say that like 12, 15 times throughout the course, because I think there is a tendency when you learn the tools of mapping in a PDC, in a landscape design program, whatever it may be, and it's like everything starts to become the nail for that hammer, and you start to just realize the power of that, but you also can forget to be out in the site, hopefully way more than you're looking at a piece of paper that you made of the site. A piece of paper is never going to show a minuscule fraction of what the site has to offer. Yeah, and yeah, I think we just get too into that part. I mean, as someone who also runs a firm, in designing and mapping, it's like it's very, very limited compared to. I would much rather spend an hour on the site with the client, as I'm sure you would too. It's so much richer than just like presenting from a map. Now, there's some things you can get across on a map, but being out on the land again is a kind of like, maybe that's part of the second one is don't overdo it on the maps. But I guess the second one I was thinking of before that is spending time in places that inspire you, or sites that are really like working well, or you think are working well, or you find beautiful, really trying to spend a lot of time in those places and learning from the people who help manage those places.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I get to know a place, like take that time, and we talk a lot about sit spots, like in our programs and such, and I love sit spots. I probably like walking more, because there's a little bit more interaction, and if you can get into that space, but yeah, just getting to know a place and a place that works, like you're saying, Ben, I think is really key, because I think we also have to understand that beginner folks also, one other encouragement piece is, like, I like to say, ask yourself, when are you in the landscape? What's the when? What's the time frame? In terms of what I mean by that is, if you walk into a new site, say like one that Ben or I designed, and a crew just installed that project, like last month. So maybe there's a bunch of bare root fruit trees, and there's some fresh earthworks with cover crop growing or something like that. Um, that's just the beginning. That's like the fire has come and renewed the landscape. And so you've had all this disturbance, and now you have this new growth. But in 5 years, that place is going to be totally different. 50 years, totally different. So when you visit these sites, when are you in the landscape? When are you in the succession of the natural ecosystem? I think it's a good question that sometimes, as designers, new designers, we go for, I don't know how to say it. Design for the mature system. Design for the 50-year plan, the 100-year plan, if you're thinking multi-generational. But along the way, there's all these little successions, and so how can you build in quick harvests, quick interaction in the first few years that bring ecosystem yields to the system, but move for that bigger, more mature, design for that.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing. I'm just going to jump in here for a second. I feel like you're sharing so much more wealth than just 3 tips through this conversation. I really appreciate the dialogue y'all are having. So for anyone that's new, that's jumping on here, right now we're talking about the 3 tips for beginner regenerative designers. And I think it's amazing to, I guess my question around it, hearing you both talk, is like, I'm actually starting my own first permaculture design, although I've been in this field for 10 years. My suggestion for new people that are wanting to be involved, or even just took their certification, is like, my learning curve was, I actually like talking about permaculture more than I like being with the soil a lot of the time. It doesn't mean I don't like digging holes or doing things like that, but I love talking about it. And so I realized very quickly that I can make a really big impact if I help, like an organization. I helped the Austin Permaculture Guild and grow their marketing and help them create income so that they can continue their work, And so I think that's important to say. We don't have to be everywhere all at once, depending on our strengths. But my question, now that I am actually starting my own design process, is like, if I'm hesitant about planting trees or doing different pieces, it's like, is that okay? Like, should I wait longer to do those things? Or like, what would you say around like the hesitancy around, or the excitement around doing it too quickly versus a hesitancy of like, oh, now it's past winter and now it's too long and now we have to wait for another winter and things like that.
I'll jump in. I think, I mean, I always say planting a tree is pretty much always a good idea, because you can, if you're planting small trees, if you're not buying $1,000 balled and burlap trees, which you probably may not be doing, um, you learn so much by putting trees in the ground and then watching how they behave. And you can move. Most trees are pretty easy to move for quite a number of years. It's like really surprising, I think, to many people who haven't done a lot of moving trees. So I don't like universal prescriptions, but I think I see way more people not planting and not jumping into their site enough, quickly enough, and just sitting back than people who are doing too much with their site. I mean, it's not even a comparison.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And if you're struggling with feeling like, am I choosing the right species? You know, and that, because that can also be a hang up for folks. Um, you know, the landscape's always happy for you to propagate native plants as well, to just get in and plant. You know, folks around here, I'm in Northern California, so very different microclimate than Ben or where you are, Chloe. And you know, I have clients. It's like, oh, we're blocked for, we can't do anything for 2 years because there's this study going on and funding and this and that, and they think that, oh, it has to be some fully designed, fully funded project before you can do anything. That's not the case at all. That's just not the case. And I said to them, well, we know that this whole like 10 acres is just going to be given up to a native ecosystem. So let's go plant acorns. Let's just go plant acorns. I mean, just be like an animal in the ecosystem and start doing shit, and start putting the acorns in the ground. You know, plant 10,000 acorns. They're not all going to survive, and some of them are going to get eaten, and you can thin them out later. So nothing's stopping you from just becoming, you know, a steward. Just start stewarding. And I even go beyond, honestly, you know, I'll call myself out. I go beyond the concept that we have to only do this kind of thing on our land, like, oh, it's my land, like, so I can only do it here. You know, where I live, we've got a coastal dune system, and the cypress trees are there are tsunami, our tsunami break, and they hold the dunes together. And so I've been just harvesting cypress seeds and sowing them out and planting them wild planting into the dunes, you know, to achieve that function. Nobody's given me permission to do it, but you know, you're an animal on the earth, and you can see it needs to be done. So do it.
Yeah, it seems like so much of the journey involves reclaiming just that humanness that Erik is describing. Like those are just human animal things, like ways of being and doing. And we just, you know, we're so many hundreds, if not thousands of years away from that reality, and it's going to take a while to reclaim, but we have such a distance to go to truly be participating. Like even the people I know who are doing a lot with their site are not participating as much as they could be. I mean, that's true for me. That's true for that we all could be so much more deeply participating. So I think that action, that those hours on the ground, hopefully every day, just interacting like Erik's describing, doing what other animals do, sow seeds, spread nut seed, spread acorns. I don't know, when I see great things, like great revelations happening with between people and land, it's always from folks who are just like really involving themselves in their place, and they may not even have like any book, you know, little book knowledge, but they're just involving themselves.
Amazing.
Totally. And you have to actually be out on the land, to be able to see the kinds of interactions that might be beneficial. You know, be out on the creek and see an erosion bank that fed from a culvert. And there's certain things, you know, I want to add this, that people often ask about where to start, you know, and that we talked about that analysis paralysis, like, oh, I haven't observed enough, I need to wait. And yeah, you know, maybe it's good to wait to have a design plan before you dig a huge pond, build huge earthworks, make big permanent changes on the land. But I often find that we're living in a time now where there's so much ecosystem destruction. There's such a debt. There's like a cultural debt in the land based on, you know, misdesigned roads and bad building and bad development. And so when I go out onto a site and I notice, you know, an erosion gully, or I notice a neglected forest that is ready to burn, uh, we could get going tomorrow. We could start working on that erosion tomorrow. We could start doing we could become fire tomorrow and help that, you know, prepare for a good fire. We don't have to wait to do those sorts of things. So I always like help people realize, like, these are things you could do now. So if you're ready to go, like, there's things you could do now. You don't have to wait as a steward. But you might want to take the time to design, you know, the big permanent structures that are going to change the land. So being able to put those things in different buckets and know how to just get activated.
Mm-hmm. That's where it's worth mentioning this scale of permanence and just having respect for that. You know, familiarize yourself with that. You can just not Google it, but DuckDuckGo it or whatever, look it up, and you know, get a sense of, okay, it's kind of obvious, but when you look at it, you realize, yes, of course, there's the heavy action, there's the excavator, bulldozer work, but there's also this stuff I could do right now with minimal consequence where I'm involving myself and I'm learning a lot.
Amazing. Yeah, those are all amazing points. I'd like to transition into the next question, although there's so much, again, wealth and depth here. And I just want to also say that I am marketing the Regenerative Landscaper. If you don't know about Erik Ohlsen's book, that's partially what we want to say here tonight. I know there's a lot of people jumping in and out. Yes, thank you, thank you. And I just also think it's funny. I think we should have a shirt, Erik, that says "Be an animal in the ecosystem" or something like that. I feel like that's your hashtag for tonight. But anyways,
Yeah.
so biggest challenges to implementing a regenerative design. I know that's a really juicy question. So yeah, I'd like to hear from both of you on that.
Go, Ben.
Oh God, I mean, there's so many. Well, it depends on a lot of things.
Yeah.
So, do you quote unquote own the land? You know, do you hold title to the land? Are you the person who can make big decisions about the land? If you're not, obviously that's a major hurdle. If you are, experience can be one, but that's where what we were talking about is all about getting experience. Knowledge can be one, but usually it's experience first. I mean, it's I think knowing about your place and how the place functions, I guess might be right at the beginning of that. And that's where good segue, because that's really what we just talked about to a large extent. Money can be one sometimes, but some things are very easily obtained for free, like seed, like Erik was talking about. We can easily plant 1,000 trees on any site for free, really. And a lot of people don't realize that, and so it's important to just emphasize that, because you can just go collect the seed.
Exactly. Yeah. Yep. All of those, big obstacles. I would also say one that is the people side of things, the decision making, how we make decisions, who you're making decisions with. If you're, who are the project stakeholders? Who's involved in the project? Is it you and your partner, or your family? Is it a client? Is it a school board? Is it a city government? And one of the, I mean, like Ben was saying, you could go out, we could go out and plant 1,000 trees, no problem, for free, no problem. But if you, depending on the dynamics of a project and who's involved, one of the biggest challenges is, how do you get on the same page with people? How do you ensure that the investment of time and energy can be multi-generational? I don't know, Ben, I don't know if you've ever experienced it, but I've certainly had gardens that were bulldozed.
Yeah.
Just, 3, 4, 5 years later, 10 years later, and that property is sold, or some shit happens, and then boom, they just bulldoze the thing. They don't understand the value of it.
Yeah, that's why I was going to say, like, the question I think is phrased as biggest hurdles to implementing a regenerative.
Mhm.
The
Yeah.
implementing to me is the key word.
Right.
Implementing a regenerative. Regenerative is one thing, but making it last is another. So you can implement all you want.
I
Go
see.
go, go crazy implementing. That's not a big deal.
Yeah.
But making it there, have it still be there in 5 and 10 and 50 and 100 years, that's a problem.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think about this a lot when because of the way the economy is set up, because of the scarcity that a lot of people feel in their lives, when there's two things that happen. One is you think, I don't have money, I don't have time, I don't want to do the work because it's not mine. I think that's a bullshit concept that we need to let go of, because the earth is ours. We are the earth. So first off, feeling like, oh, I rent a place, so I'm not going to build a garden because I don't own it. I mean, can you have a regenerative world in the wake of your life? Everywhere you go, every day, you can be a participant in the ecosystem and support it in some way. So that's one question: is the mind frame, right? But then the second one there is, those of us, when you do own land, or you do have the decision making power over how a landscape is designed, managed, implemented, what's the time scale you're working for? And are we capable in the Western world to get back to being place-based people in such a way where we can be multi-generational in the kind of work that we do? I mean, is that possible? And like, that's a question I'm asking myself all the time. Can I leave a legacy? Like in the Middle East, there's 1,000-year-old olive groves, and like for the people there, like those olives are their ancestors, and that knowledge was passed down. Are we capable of creating a culture that is in such a way where we are implementing regenerative systems that our great grandchildren are benefiting from? That I don't have the answer to that, but that's something that I, you know, fall asleep thinking about all the time.
Mm-hmm. You reminded me of an old friend of mine named Dave, Eric, who when I first met, he's a carpenter, a brilliant carpenter. I went out and saw his place, and he has the most immaculate on contour gardens and really mature berry bushes and fruit trees. And I remember saying, well, I didn't know you had a place. When did you buy this place? He's like, no, we've just been renting here for 8 years. And I'm like, uh, were these gardens here? Like, no, we planted all this. And I'm like, but you don't own this. He's like, no, but like nothing was going to stop him from doing what you're saying. He was just going to do what he knew how to do. And it's no surprise the day he eventually, well, he found land after 12 years of saving hard cash, cold cash, working as a carpenter. The day he closed on his land, he told his landlord, and they're like, his landlord came out and he was digging up his trees, and the landlord said, "What are you doing?" He's like, "Well, you never wanted to pay for these. I always asked you if you wanted to buy the landscaping I'm installing, and you said I could, but you didn't want to pay for them, so I'm taking them with me." And he was, he's going to leave some, and it was no question whether this guy was going to succeed when he finally got on land that he was, much more in charge of. I mean, and it's incredible what he's done. And the day he closed on land, he was planting mature bearing age apples that he dug from the rental where he was for 8 years. So, that was such an example of like, just there's some people who aren't going to let anyone stop them, and they're just going to do it. They don't even own land, some of them, and how successful they're going to be when they get to a more ideal situation.
100%. And that 8 years he was there, he's harvesting. He's obtaining harvest every day. The ecosystem is obtaining harvest and yields every single day. And then he probably, even though he dug stuff up, he probably also left a garden, left topsoil, left a living ecosystem in his wake. And I have plants here, now I'm on, a homestead that I have the power over. And I have plants here that I propagated from my very, very first garden when I was 19 years old. And every single rental place that I went to, I'd build the big garden. And when I left, I would propagate the entire garden, take it to the next place, leave that garden, build the new one. And I did that in, 4 or 5 places until we finally landed somewhere. And you know, I go back, sometimes those gardens get dug up, but I could go back to 3 or 4 of those and they are totally kicking, you know, like they're still fully
Yeah.
functioning.
And the whole time he's harvesting, learning too, knowledge for himself, experience for himself. That's invaluable.
Yeah.
And if he took every plant, he's leaving a whole soil ecosystem, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's a resonance there, both physical and non-physical. System's gonna start itself up again, even without him, to some extent.
Well, yeah, what's the seed bank of
Right.
that soil after all of that work, right? It's like, you know, we talk about that all the time, like let things go to seed, rehabilitate the seed bank with useful beneficials and such. And so you probably within a year, the thing was a raging, useful garden
Well,
again, just by that.
the concept of seed bank, like you just said that word, and that really gets at so much of what, you know, we're both, I think, talking about here. Was like you can choose to leave a seed bank like every single day, no matter where you are. You know, what seed bank are you going to leave? It really choice.
I love that. What seed bank are you going to leave?
Exactly.
I want to address some obstacles that one person put in the thread and made me think of, like, again, how you're in completely different ecosystems. Their problem was that they're too wooded, but I also want to address like the lack of water in California, and then like the massive amount of water on the East Coast, including Vermont. So I feel like those can all be amazing and obstacles. Well, maybe not the lack of water. So that's the most interesting one for me, but yeah, the wooded, the no sunlight, things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, they all come with their own challenges and opportunities. You know, we often have to get above water, but harvesting water is always important. Even if you have a lot of it, you know, water harvesting you can apply to both climates as a key strategy. To, you know, keeping it on site, on every site, as much as possible for as long as possible within reason, because of the values it offers. So that's a universal.
Yeah, not to mention, I mean, almost the same exact strategy to avoid flood is what we use to harvest water. You know, it's just having an intentional management strategy with your water allows you to do both recharge and have a, you know, protect yourself in storm surges during flood systems. And I mean, and a forest ecosystem, I mean, many of us come from forest people. Like you know, there are whole cultures that obtain almost all of their basic needs from the forest. So I think that there's, you know, looking at how we interact with trees, both as food sources, building sources, fuel sources, how we open up certain areas to let light in. But I mean, it is a challenge that, you know, depending on what you can do, you know, the context always is dictating what's possible. But you know, the forest, growing pigs in the forest, right? Certain animals that you can introduce there, bringing good fire into a forest, depending on the context, will help renew and open up space. And now you've got berries and you've got nuts and you've got a whole ecosystem. So, you know, just depends on the context there. But I will say, I'll add another layer here about water in California, because here we are, you know, I'm in Northern California, so generally a bit wetter than Southern California. But even in a drought, I mean, 1 inch of rain on 1 acre is about 27,000 gallons of water. So, you know, we want to talk about drought. You know, let's talk to our friend Neil Spackman about, you know, how to do that in Saudi Arabia, right? Like that's real drought. When we're in drought in Northern California, not to downplay it, I mean, it is serious, but we might get 20 inches of rain. That's still an insane amount of
But
water.
when we were in drought for 3 years, we got 35 inches that year.
Exactly. So like on my 5 acres over at the Permaculture Skills Center in our biggest drought year, we still harvested 2.5 million gallons of water in the
Wow.
landscape, right? Because we set the system up to harvest every drop of water and infiltrate that in the land. So so much is about the lens that we see these things through, and I think the solutions that you would find in Ben's books, in my book, within the permaculture movement in general, really points to a way to be drought proof. Even in dry land ecosystems.
Amazing point. Someone also was talking about being on a steep slope and saying that water is an issue there. I was wondering if you could address that.
I mean, there's so many. It depends. It's
Exactly.
gets into it's hard. It's easy to give prescriptions, but it's usually not very accurate. I mean, eroded. I saw eroded thin
Right.
soil. I mean, a few things I might offer. If you have eroded thin soil and it's steep, you just have to try to keep your soil as much as possible and prevent erosion as much as possible. So I'm assuming it's steep since it says mountainside. So just being on contour with all your systems and slowing, spreading, sinking water, looking for wherever water is running, trying to encourage it to walk, keep it slowly moving on site rather than rushing downhill.
Amazing.
100%. And I'll just add too that we have situations like that where the topsoil is really shallow and there's like a really high bedrock, and there's the potential for things to just totally slough off. And so I have a project like that right now in the East Bay. And one of the things that we are prescribing there is they also have a lot of forest that needs stewardship. So, if you don't feel like you could dig a swale on contour or something like that, then you put brush on contour, put logs on contour, plant on contour, put fences on contour, and allow animals to create that system for you. You don't always have to dig in the ground. You can also just dig gently in with material, and then allow natural processes to take out. Someone wrote terraces there. Sometimes we can't terrace because of the situation, like, but depending on the context, we can't physically terrace right away. But if you do it this way, if you build, wooden debris piles across contour, then cover them in wood chips and then plant on the upslope side, in 4 or 5 years, you'll have terraces, but they'll be more stable and secure because they were allowed to sort of evolve in their own way.
We have a good question in the chat, and those are amazing answers. Have you used signs, information plates when done regenerative landscaping practices, in public places, and if so, how?
Yeah, we've had interpretive elements in some of the systems we design. Just showing species or explaining what the function is of a system, that's installed there. So sometimes I think that's involved swales or a guild of plantings, but especially just like species labels. We haven't done it too extensively. We've done the real information's in like the plans usually, not signage for our work anyway.
I'll just jump in on that question. I think the key word here is public places, and I don't want to esteemed permaculturalists to say this, so I'm going to say it. Guerrilla gardening is great. Seed bombs are great. Like, just plant where you want. And I have done like a rain catchment for a city before. I mean, of course, then you do need to get permission, but there are different ways to go about accessing public places for sure.
Well, I'm also saying guerrilla gardening is great, and start spreading seed wherever it has to be on.
I think we initiated that earlier on, like,
yeah,
guerrilla garden, be the animal.
Right.
But I will say there's a lot of great public regenerative projects, and I don't know about in your area, Ben, or you, Chloe, but here in Northern California, we've got a number of public food forests that we implemented. And we have right here in my town of Sebastopol, we spent 2 years volunteering with the city council and a community group to design the city hall and library, which are next to each other. And so then we were able to fundraise from the city and work with a nonprofit organization. And anyways, we have a fully public food forest right here in downtown, with Asian pears and citrus and apples and grapes and herbs and Luther Burbank plants, because he was from here. And so, you know, these things take time, but public food foresting is such a fun, rewarding, powerful tool. There's a lot of precedence for that now. And we don't have a lot of signage at that one, but what we do have is the design plan is up inside the library. People can check it out. And we created a living history garden. So it's 4 different sections. And one section is, you know, represents sort of the indigenous cultural plants of the area. Another section, the agrarian settler era, where there was a lot of farming happening here. One dedicated to Luther Burbank, and then one for sort of the modern day permaculture garden. So it's a history, a walk through time. It's a cultural history museum outside in the garden that is also stacks as a public food forest. So these are really rewarding projects if you can get in on those.
Amazing. Great. Well, I want to head to the last question since we don't have more comments around that point. But and this, of course, is the most exciting question for me, is what is the vision of regenerative landscaping in the future? Like, where do you want that to go? And I think you've touched on it with talking about succession and how do we ensure, you know, the longevity of ecosystems, but maybe we can look at different perspectives as well on that, and how you see people being involved or in policy or so many different ways.
To you, Ben.
Well, I'll jump in. I mean, I would say that, you know, what Erik does, like Erik's firm is much more, I think they do a lot more work with like landscape installation. You know, we're primarily landscape architecture site planning firm, but we said at the outset that, you know, the ideal would be like that landscape, the field of landscape maintenance, which is massive, so probably hundreds of billions of dollars, ceases to exist in a sane culture because everyone who lives in each place is managing their landscape. But that's very idealistic. And the fact is, there's a lot of maintenance that has to be education for the quote unquote landowner or whoever's managing the landscape. So like, I'm sure Erik does a ton of education is probably like a primary thing he's doing with his clients. And so that's been a realization I've had over time, is like, you can install all the cool stuff you want, but if people don't know how to live with it, which is usually the case in this world right now, in this country anyways, you know, it's not gonna stay and succeed.
Yeah. So the question is, what's the future of this? The ideal future? Is that the question, Chloe?
Right. Yeah. The future you're envisioning for regenerative landscaping.
I mean, if I'm going to be idealistic as well, it's that we build a culture of place again, you know, that we learn how to be people of place again, and everything that comes with that. I think that the value of life goes up, the health of our bodies goes up, the happiness of our communities go up, and certainly the health and thrivingness of ecosystems goes up when we all learn to be place-based people, which is essentially what Ben said. That we are connected to place, and that we see it as relative, you know, as our family. That our gardens and our landscapes and our ecosystems are our family. How do you treat your family? You know, how do you care for your people? And I think that it sounds totally idealistic in the world that we are in now, but I think if you break down the fundamental needs that people have and the struggles that people have in the world right now, I think that you find that solution there. You know, you find the kind of safety and security and camaraderie and abundance when you learn how to be a community that's connected to place. And So yeah, there are a lot of strategy, you know, in the real tangible world. You mentioned, what did you mention, Chloe? Political, you know, getting people
Policy.
elected to local
Yeah.
government. Yeah, I would say um, local, you know, focus local. Like that's your most powerful place, is to focus on your local place. And here where I am, we've seen amazing changes in the past 20 years. I mean, we have fully trained regenerative designers elected to our county supervisors, our board, our, you know, our city councils, our planning director, our planning departments. We have full permaculture experts in those positions of power, and as a result, um, you know, a lot of incredible things. Like in 2017, we had the Tubbs fire came and burned down 1,500 homes, and 40 plus people died. And it was supposedly unprecedented. But of course, it's not unprecedented. Just talk to the native folks, and they'll tell you, oh no, we've been watching this fire for 10,000 years. What are you talking about? Unprecedented. And as a result, the county, because of the fact that we've built a regenerative culture, you know, all the education we've put in over the decades, not just myself, like Oxford Arts and Ecology Center, the Daily Acts organization, and a lot of amazing folks in this area. Within 2 or 3 years, this county turned from a fire suppression dominant policy around forests and fire to probably one of the centers of good fire, like anywhere in the world now. I mean, there's thousands and thousands of prescribed burns happening every year now since the Tubbs fire, and those are often led by indigenous folks. To me, that is like total paradigm shift of how we look at the land, how we act with the land, who are we gaining wisdom, who are we following for wisdom and knowledge, and it's mighty, you know. And I think that you know, that gives me a little bit of hope, and I think that, you know, I feel we're moving in the right direction. How long it takes, I don't know.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it's remarkable.
Well, yeah, I'm really grateful that you brought up the point around, well, one, giving a really solid example of how you're already seeing these solutions in place, but also, yeah, what is the future of bringing Indigenous people back and giving them their rightful voice around their land as far as like how to caretake for it? And it doesn't mean that all of them, you know, that I think that's naive to say that all of them still have the solutions in their head, because, you know, I do think that there are people, a lot of them have unfortunately been removed from that, but it doesn't mean that those solutions aren't still there and that there's still wisdom to be had.
Oh, it's there. It's there. And I'll just add one last piece there, is that it's not just about the literacy and maybe, you know, knowing how to steward a landscape or design and build. It's not really just about that. It's actually about the heart. You know, it's about like how you look at the world, how you look at the land. Do you see yourself as separate? Do you see yourself within? Do you look out and see family? Do you look out and see commodity? And I think that that's the indigenous wisdom that is probably the most fundamental for us to take leadership on, is what comes, how we move from a place of relationship and connection and heart, less so strategy and technique.
Yeah, and
I mean,
if you have that relational approach, you'll learn the techniques.
Absolutely.
well, I'm feeling like this is coming to an end, and I've really appreciated all of this time together. Ben, do you have any last things that you would like to include here?
No, I mean, I think, you know, anything, what we've talked about already is there's a lot of there's a lot of jumping off points for so many, you know, so many things that you can go to from there. I mean, I just want to reiterate again, because there's people are coming in and out. You know, this book that Erik has come out with just recently is a phenomenal reference point. I mean, I think there's a lot of aspects that we've talked about here. All of the aspects we've talked about here, I think, are in this book, and then of course so many other aspects to have, as you know, even if you have been in this work for a long time, as a reference point. I referred to it the other day just to make sure I wasn't forgetting anything on our pond design workshop. It's like, oh, what did Erik say about pond? Because Erik's been doing this work. You know, there's a lot of books out there where people like research other stuff and then they just report about it. They're kind of reporters, but they're not on the ground doing the work. And, you know, this guy, it's very clear, has been on the ground doing the work for quite a while. So thank you for that, Erik, to just, you know, put a bunch of it in one spot for us to have as a reference
Yeah,
point.
it is very in-depth,
Thank you so
and
much.
again, to hear Ben's opinion on that says a lot right there, that a permaculture designer is using this book, and he's not the only one. I've sent this to quite a few, and they are also, so it's amazing to hear that, Ben, and thank you so much for saying that. Erik, do you have anything else to add before we get off?
Well, I just, I would just want to give a plug for Ben because I mean, you are like the definition of inspiration of, being on the land. And I feel like you really walk your talk and you really share a lot with us too. And, that's a lot to share, like that's like a whole other labor in of itself. And you're very graceful in that. So I just want to say, appreciate you. You've totally inspired me over the years. And I think this is our first time coming together to chat, which is fucking hilarious, man. But so thanks for bringing us together, Synergetic Press.
Yeah.
And I also just want to say that there's a lot of people that joined here that are also veterans of the work, and a lot of great comments and folks. And I think that one piece that I think I hear echoed in you, Ben, and something that I feel is that, and I just want to say this for all of you new folks or folks that are, in the middle of your process, that don't be surprised if as you continue along the journey of regenerative design and you engage the land, if you start to realize that you don't know anything, like now I'm spent my whole adult life here, and yeah, I can tell you all these things, I can write that book and stuff, but when I go out on the land, I don't want to know anything. I don't know anything. It's not about knowing, like seek knowledge and gather knowledge and wisdom, but don't use knowledge like a hammer on the landscape. Like it's that's a rookie mistake. It's not a tool to bludgeon the land with. It's about being in a place of not knowing, and that is where an emergent design that it works in harmony will emerge.
Yeah, you made me think of, there's a bell curve of you think you know not much at the beginning, then you think you know a lot, and then you realize you don't know that much.
And keep learning and growing, man, forever. It's like, just be a little kid with this, like the little kids have it right. They're out there digging and running water and just experimenting. Yeah. Thanks to everybody who joined us and for coming out today. And thank you so much, Ben.
Thank you guys. Yeah.
Thank you. And for those that are here and didn't get to see everything, these recordings you can often find on the pages. So if you're already following Ben, that's great. And if you're not following Synergetic Press, go follow us and you can find the live stream there as well. So great. Well, thanks and have a good night, everyone.
Take care. Thanks everyone. Bye.